Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to welcome you all on our Bilingual Flash Series 6. My name is Elmas Bougamaz, and I practice law on Kuwait courts, and I'm a member of the Bilingual Flash for the Investment and Business Committee in Kuwait's Law Society.
It's a platform discussing different legal aspects and knowledge. This committee is led by Ms. and today's clash will be discussed with my colleague, Mr.
Everyone.
Hello, Mr. We are hosting our two speakers who work as compliance officers in private sector in Kuwait as industry experts. Welcome Ms. and Ms. Zahra Abbas.
Thank you for having us. Hi, thank you for having
So today we will be presenting the importance role of a compliance officer in the world of business and investment industry. So what do you think about it, Mr.
Thank you, Ustad Almas, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Once again, my name is Mahmoud Kareva. I'm an attorney here in Kuwait, a member of the Kuwait Bar Association, and a member of the Bilingual Flash for the Investment and Business Committee. Once again, relate to it. And as I spoke to people about today's episode, they didn't know how important the compliance officer's position is. So frankly, we can say that it's quite interesting, and a lot of viewers want to know more about it. But before we dig more into detail, Salamas, let's answer the most general question. What is or who is a compliance officer, Salamas?
Yes, basically, Ustad Ahmed, a compliance officer is an individual that ensures that a company complies with its outside regulative and requirements, as well as the internal policies and bylaws.
That is correct, Ustad Almas. So they have to make sure that these companies comply with the legal requirements and policies as well. But but a lot of people are also interested about a little bit of history of a compliance officers. Ustad Zahra, would you give us a little short brief on the history of compliance officers?
Hello, everyone. So according to Kuwaiti law, compliance roles are applied since the provisions of company law were enacted. We will see that almost all its articles emphasize on compliance between the founders and partners towards the shareholders and stakeholders in all types of companies. Like, for example, let's take Article 46 of company law. It is talking about partnerships. It's the simplest way of partnerships, and it emphasizes the role. It emphasizes the role of the general manager in complying with its corporate measures, and how, in order to make an abnormal decision, he should obtain consent from all the shareholders of the company, or that simple activity should be precisely written in the company's articles of associations. So similarly, in public listed companies, there is an employee called the compliance officer, like myself, and Ms. Mushgan. So while directly they report to the board, they also make sure that members of the company comply with the rules set out by the law, and their responsibility is to educate each member of the company and to ensure their role in compliance, because a company is a big place and everybody has a role in compliance in it. So we need to ease the workflow in the company. So that's why everybody should comply with the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Zahra. Indeed, that is...
أنا إيش تجيب هذا دفاية أقول.
I think.
Thank you. I think someone is like they're mistaken. I don't know. But thank you, Ms. Zahra. It was a great knowledge and background about a compliance officer. But Mahmoud, what do you think a compliance officer's duties are? Like, what duties are held to a compliance officer?
I mean, generally speaking, compliance officers have duties to their employers to work with management staff and to identify and manage governmental risk. They need to make sure that these businesses and organizations or even individuals conform to contractual obligation and governmental regulations and laws. But if we're going to dig a little bit deeper, we need to hear from our guest speakers more about it, and to let us know why it has a broad occupational title. Why should it be applicable in businesses and investment entities as well? Ustad Azad, I'm going to ask you this question. Can you please state specific industries that recognize the existence of a compliance officer?
So there are many forms actually of being a compliance officer. You could be an environmental compliance inspector or a license examination or inspector. Similarly, you can be a government property inspector or investigator, regulatory affairs specialist. These jobs are not limited. Like there's all sorts of different positions in that matter.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mujgan, since you have a really good background in compliance officer, would you enlighten us on the job or the role of the compliance officer?
First of all, thank you for this invitation and this opportunity for us to share the knowledge and to bring awareness to this new role that is in the market right now. And also a special thanks to the Kuwait Bar Association for organizing this meeting. So back to your question, the job of a compliance officer ensures that companies follow external regulations as well as their own internal policies and guidelines. Its objective is to help companies basically obey regulations, comply with applicable laws, policies, contractual obligations, and also to meet eligibility requirements for licenses and permits, for example. They also have a role to help the trained employees of the company on requirements that must be met, and also to assist with regulatory processes. So that's basically the role.
Thank you. What would be a compliance officer in a company? Ms. Mujgan.
Usually the chief compliance officer or CCO is the head of the firm's compliance department or compliance function. That role has a number of different and, in my opinion, in occasions, competing stakeholders. What I mean is that we have regulators, we have governmental supervisory agencies, you have its own company's board, the risk committee, you have the audit committee, you have the CEO, you have the front line of business, internal audit, law enforcement agencies, and so on. All these stakeholders have common view of the core of the role of the CCO and the compliance function. However, it is very likely that their expectations are not the same, and at the margins, their expectations will diverge. So that each one of them have a different expectation from this function.
Thank you very much. Framework for the compliance officer function. Can you please clarify the framework of a compliance officer?
One way to clarify the boundaries for the role of compliance function is through the apportionment of responsibilities to the 3 lines of defense. First is typically the business. Second line is the control functions, such as risk and compliance functions. And of course, everybody knows that the 3rd line is assurance in the form of internal audit.
That's a pretty good way to put it, the 3 lines of defense. I'm just wondering, Ustad Mujgan, to having such a huge responsibility on a compliance officer, to what extent can they offer advice? Can they give legal advice on some cases?
Yes, definitely. In many organizations, the compliance function encompasses elements of advisory, including advising on compliance with laws and regulations. It also has the responsibility to monitor, control, and manage regulatory relationships. One issue with this is that holding such a role can blur perceptions. What I mean by that is that when the compliance function is working in partnership with the business, it is no longer a control function or a control element peering over the shoulders of the business, challenging every action. So is it a control function, or is it a partner, or is it a combination of both? So if we say that it's if the answer to this question is that it's a combination, I think there is a material issue that we have to face about how the compliance function can be a truly independent second line of defense. If it is challenging a course of conduct or a transaction on which it has already given advice. Here is where the distinction between responsibilities become challenging.
I do agree that these can become challenging and can blur perceptions as well. But I was also wondering, do all compliance officers have the same duties? Ustadha Zahra?
So if you look deeply into this field, you will see that this varies from industry to industry. But, you know, in general, this job requires a person to be able to review practices, conduct investigations, as well as identify potential risks. They should also maintain regulatory knowledge, and they must review and update internal policies, as well as preparing and filing required documents. It is also important that they educate the staff because, as we said, everybody in the company has a role in compliance.
I do agree. Educating the staff is a really good and important step as well. But I was also, Saddam Mujgan, let me ask you this. How can a compliance be enhanced within a single company?
I believe that compliance can be enhanced by assigning responsibilities and having a foundation of effective compliance policies and procedures. The senior management team as a whole has a role in compliance and has a role in delivering compliance with regulatory requirements. So each senior manager's role and responsibility, as well as the role of the compliance officer, must be specifically clarified within the company's internal policies and procedures. I think that's one way to enhance it.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Mujgan. But since your background as a compliance officer is like extended and you have like a very good experience, would you tell us about the progress of compliance officers' role in Kuwait?
The role of compliance officer became more prominent in Kuwait after the establishment of the Capital Markets Authority, which everybody has heard of, which is the CMA, and specifically the rules of corporate governance that are applicable for all licensed and listed companies in Kuwait. In licensed companies, the compliance officer has a responsibility to ensure compliance with CMA regulations and to ensure a comprehensive report on risk management is submitted to CMA biannually on the risks in the company. Also, it's a position that is required to be registered with the CMA and undergo a verification process to be approved for this position to ensure that the required set of knowledge and skills for this position and the competency of the potential incumbent of the position. Compliance officers in listed companies in Kuwait are responsible for receive all all insider trade intentions. So it means that anyone intending to trade and any insider intending to trade in the stocks of a listed company must, before doing the trade, submit their intention to the compliance officer of that listed company. And the reason for that is that that compliance officer has the obligation to determine if potential insider trading based on confidential, non-public information is taking place. Therefore, they have a huge responsibility to take necessary action in those instances.
Thank you, Saddam Mujgan. For such serious jobs, I mean, there has to be some serious and a lot of responsibilities. Ustadha Zahra, could you please indicate these responsibilities for us?
So we as compliance officers often work for specific businesses or organizations, and we are tasked and responsible of making sure that the work being done meets 3 standards: legal, ethical, and even quality standards. This job ranges from making sure safety measures meet relevant standards and making sure financial documents are prepared properly and submitted on time. A significant part of our job might also involve reviewing documents, work practices, and identifying areas where change might be necessary. So compliance officers typically will consult with management on findings and play a lead role in updating training practices, manuals for employees.
So basically we can add to that, and we can say that a compliance officer may also work as a consultant who are brought in to review a particular organization's practices. And some may work for regulatory agencies tasked with enforcing standards within a particular industry.
What do you think? Could you add other kind of responsibilities that a compliance officer might have?
Yeah, I think my colleague, she covered a lot of responsibilities. I believe also because I think that there is a broad range of responsibilities for this position, but I can think of a few of them. For example, it is the role of this person to effectively communicate the company's key ethical principles and compliance regulations. But definitely that's one of the roles. It also, I think it includes organizing regular training sessions for employees to communicate key regulatory changes and updates, which is particularly important in a heightened governmental environment. Where change is constant, and we're seeing that these days, because awareness of these changes and integrating and applying them within business practices protect the company from many negative consequences. Another role is to work with business units and management to ensure appropriate contingency plans are in place that set guidelines on how to respond to a possible compliance breach in the future. And if there is an event of a regulatory breach, it is important for the compliance officer to suggest appropriate disciplinary measures in place to avoid future recurrence of such an incident. Also, a compliance officer should continually monitor and review compliance procedures to help identify possible areas where improvements could be made. Similarly, compliance officers are expected to provide an objective view of company policies. What I mean by that is that possible influence by other employees, including management and executives, to overlook infractions may result in significant fines and sanctions that may lead to financial loss or even closure of business, because the regulators do have this kind of power. Finally, I believe that the fact that a compliance officer continually reviews the work of others, it is essential that they have polished people skills and work well with others.
Right, I think it's time now to talk about a little bit about penalties. Zahra, in light of such a significant role, I was just wondering, how did the Kuwaiti legislator enacted these penalties against violation for non-compliance with rules? And can you list those penalties for us?
You know, Ustad Ahmoud, I get the same exact question from a lot of people. If we look at the articles of company law and the official regulatory authorities, it stipulates that multiple penalties are applied for those who violate the provisions of the law. So regardless of the party committing the violation, the disciplinary board may, after of course being satisfied that the violation being committed, issue one of the following penalties, and it goes gradually. So First, they caution the violator to discontinue committing the violation. If they issued the caution and he didn't comply, or if the violation is a little bit larger than just issuing a caution, then they issue a warning, a formal warning. Another form of the disciplinary board decisions might be imposing restrictions on the activities of the violator, or imposing financial penalties. And they are different according to the severity of the violation, but of course not exceeding 50,000 Kuwaiti dinars. Ustad Ahmoud, in all cases, the disciplinary board may cancel all transactions related to the violation and all the effects caused by it, or they must require the violator to pay amounts equal to the benefit he or she acquired, or the value that they lost to avoid as a result of the violation. the amount may be multiplied if the person repeats committing the violation. So it depends on the severity, and it depends on how much caution must be implemented in the violator.
That's very good. I think we have this question in one of our audience, and they were wondering, what is the path of becoming a compliance officer? What do I need to do, Ustadh Zahra, if I want to become a compliance officer?
In licensed companies, you have to go through a specific verifications, and they have specific requirements like years of experience and a specific set of knowledge are required. But in most industries, it's very simple. There is no single path in becoming a compliance officer, but it is not an entry-level position. So regardless of the industry, those seeking to become a compliance officer first need to establish themselves in a particular field in order to have the skill and knowledge, and then they can serve as a compliance officer.
Thank you, Ms. Zahra. Thank you very much. So, Ustad Ahmoud, we can see how important such roles. So, do you think a compliance officer should have certain skill sets? And if so, what are the skill sets and competencies of a compliance officer?
I mean, Ustad Almas, I mean, here we are sitting with two compliance officers. I think they have to be highly knowledgeable and having experiences in relevant industry and have full awareness of laws and regulations. Other several qualities they need to possess, something like critical thinking, problem solving for starters. They need to be detail oriented, to notice certain actions that might result in liabilities. They need to have leadership, high ethical standards, and last and most importantly, good communication skills and being able to work with others, Ustad Almas.
Thank you, very nice. So, Ms. Zahra, can you please give us an example of compliance failures locally published?
Okay, so regulators emphasize on the implementations of the laws and bylaws and urges all concerned parties to comply with the best international practices, considering, let's say, transparency, fairness. Of course, that is all in order to create a healthy, attractive investment environment. That was the reason compliance got enacted in the first place. So therefore, anyone with an interest in the company can sue for malpractice, whether it's a partner in a partnership or in limited liability companies, or if it's a shareholder in a listed company. A wonderful feature listed in Kuwaiti's company law is that it gives minority shareholders the right to question members of the board of directors in the company or the auditor. They can question them in the General Assembly in case they have any doubts on some actions made in the name of the company. Also, Articles 303 to 306 in company law listed a number of penalties that could impose on members of the board of directors or the executive directors in the company or the auditors, or some other reasons, some other events. You can see the liquidator having some penalties implemented on him. These penalties are imposed in cases of fraud, inaccuracy of the financial statements, or malpractice. With the discretion of the court, of course, in estimating the measure of the penalty in proportion to the crime being committed.
Thank you for that. Ustad Mujgan, on an international scale, can you give us examples of compliance failures? You're on mute, Ustad Mujgan.
Sorry about that. There has been numerous compliance failures throughout the years and in recent history, which resulted in fines and reputational damage. Banks, big tech, pharmaceutical, big four firms, all have been subject to it. I can broadly mention some recent cases. For example, Google, one of the big tech companies which everybody knows about, was hit in 2019 with a $1.7 billion US fine by the European Commission. It was its third in 3 years for basically breaching competition rules, as Google was blocking rival online search advertisers from getting a foothold in the market. Another big tech company, Facebook, also was slammed by the Federal Trade Commission in 2019 with a $5 billion penalty for deceiving users about their ability to control the privacy of their personal information. It was the largest fine ever handed out for violating consumer privacy, and nearly 20 times more than the largest penalty related to data privacy or security ever imposed worldwide. Away from big tech, another example is KPMG, one of the big four that everybody knows about. It has had a especially embarrassing year in 2019, culminating in a $50 million settlement with the SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States, over allegations that KPMG audit leaders stole confidential information belonging to the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board in an effort to improve the results of the Accounting Oversight Board annual inspection of KPMG results, of KPMG audits. They also had cheated on internal exams. So they were accused. So this fine was for this and for the cheating on internal exams that were actually intended to test whether they understood a variety of accounting principles and other topics of importance. So these are some of the cases that I think of. There are also countless examples of failures in the banking sector, which everybody's heard about, resulting in large fines and settlements throughout the years. Some of these banks were completely shut down due to their violations. The range of large fines are between $2.6 to $16.6 billion to banks such as Credit Suisse, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, and BNP Paribas. So these are the examples that generally, but there are a lot of examples out there.
Thank you.
So if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask our guest speakers.
Are there any questions?
Just wait a few. Are there any questions? Yeah. I don't think there is. Salamas.
So thank you, Mr. Hamoud and Ms. Mujgan and Ms. Zahra for your great efforts, and thank you all of the attendees.
Thank you again for the invitation. Thank you so much.
It goes without saying that it's a pleasure for us to be here, and it's a pleasure to work with the Bilingual Clash Committee. It's really nice to be working with you, spreading the knowledge in the world.
Yes, thank you. We were delighted to have had this great discussion with all of you. Please stay tuned for our next episode. We'll be coming back with more interesting topics. Thank you.
Thank you so much.